Okay guys, it's been a crazy few months in the private rented property market. As you guys know, rents are spiralling out of control, costs are at the highest they've ever been, supply is just non-existent across the UK. This is leaving families completely unable to gain safe accommodation. It's just honestly a complete mess, and there are a list of things as to why this may be happening, and we're going to try and unpick some of that in this video today. So it's been estimated that 260,000 properties have been pulled from the private rented sector. That's landlords deciding enough is enough, I don't want anything else to do with this, it's become way too risky, way too much hassle for me to manage a private rented tenancy, so I'm deciding to either sell, withdraw my property from the market, or look at other ways of allocating that property to such as Airbnb or holiday lets. Now look, there's going to be a lot of people in my comments who have wanted this for quite some time. I've seen it on my previous videos. I like to think I'm a very balanced person. I try and look out for the interest of both tenants and landlords on this page, but there's going to be a lot of people who have been jumping for joy that landlords are finally having to sell their properties and are no longer renting it on the private sector. However, what they failed to understand was how much this was going to affect people who rent in the private sector, who rely on the private sector for accommodation. Lots of people don't want to buy properties. People do need to rent. They realise that the private rented sector has its place in our housing market, and by forcing landlords out of the door to not rent their properties is just causing this crisis to spiral out of control.
So this is the big UK landlord sell-off. Why, over the last 3 years, have landlords been selling off their properties? Well, you've got stuff like anti-landlord taxes, you've got old, tired landlords that haven't ever kept up with the property maintenance and now suddenly find their tenants leaving and they need to maintain the property, and you've got people just so annoyed with everything they're leaving.
Section 24 came in, which obviously meant that the landlord could no longer offset their interest payments from their mortgage from their tax liability. So basically what that means is that landlords, when this rule came into place, their tax bills were significantly higher, and when I say significantly, it was massive. Again, rocked the whole sector, saw many landlords leave because of this, because it was no longer a profitable place to be. However, landlords slowly crept back in, understood that there was still some money to be made, it was still a good place to put your money. However, these issues are now starting to compound, and again, landlords are questioning whether really this is somewhere we want to put our money. So this is why we have seen this mass exodus of landlords, and obviously there's such a shortage of supply now.
In terms of the limit to the number of buy-to-lets you have, I suppose there's two aspects to it. The FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, consider amateur landlords to have 3 buy-to-let properties or less. Once you have a 4th property, and then you're considered a professional landlord, and the criteria tightens a bit, and some of the lenders don't lend to what are known as portfolio landlords.
So let's talk about the rental crisis that's going on right now. So scenes like this, where you're seeing over 50 people queuing up for a single property in East London, is becoming more and more of a regular occurrence. And the really scary thing is, and the reason more attention needs to be brought onto this, is not only is it not getting better, looking at all the metrics, it looks to be heading in a worse direction. For the last 7 to 8 years, we've seen landlords consistently selling up at a much higher rate than landlords making new purchases. A lot of this is due to the host of anti-landlord legislation that has brought in, that has made conditions hostile for property investors. So a lot of them have decided to say it's probably not worth the stress, to call it a day and to liquidate their entire portfolios. Then we had the mini budget last year, which shook up the mortgage market, and for a lot of property investors, that was the final nail in the coffin. So what's the result? So this is the result of a poll from a property event that I went to last week, which is confirming a lot of what we're already seeing. The blue bars are the ones that show people agreeing. The first one shows agreement that a lot of landlords are going to move over to short-term lets, which in itself is a problem, because short-term lets are generally tailored for people that aren't local. So what that means is it takes that property away from the local lettings market. It's overwhelmingly agreed that independent landlords will fall, which we're already seeing. It's overwhelmingly agreed that available properties will fall, which we're already seeing. It's overwhelmingly agreed that rents will rise, which again, we're already seeing. So some of you might be saying, of course you'd say that, you're a property investor, why should we make conditions better for landlords? Well, the way I see it, it's not making conditions better for one group in particular, but the best solution for the housing crisis that we're now undoubtedly all in. What people need to understand is more rental stock benefits tenants as there's more choice available. By far and away, the most common argument I see for people wanting to get rid of landlords is putting all of the blame on landlords for properties and houses being unaffordable. But if you take a moment to look at the stats, they are not the main factor, not even close. In the last few years, we've seen landlords sell up at the fastest rate we've seen over the last 20 years. But what has happened in pretty much that same time period? Property prices have also grown at pretty much the fastest pace we've seen in recent times. Forcing landlords out of the market will not solve this nation's property affordability issues. The issue is the supply-demand imbalance of rental properties is at crisis levels and is continuing to go up. What's worse is I don't see a solution to this issue on the horizon. We have social housing, which is completely inadequate, not to mention droves of tenants who bought their properties at a massive discount under the right to buy scheme and then sold off at a profit, tax-free, and then we're left worse off than where we started. Build to rent as an industry is growing, but nowhere near the volume we require. The home ownership affordability has really been hit since the mini budget last year for first-time buyers. You know, if the government have come out and said we're going to force private landlords out of the market, but what we do have is an alternative to supply to take up that demand, it probably wouldn't be good for me, but I would completely understand it. But that's not the case here. There is no plan in place. I'm having lettings agents call me literally every single day. They're desperate for stock, which has never happened before. At the property event, Ben Beadle, CEO of the Landlords Association, addressed the whole anti-landlord rhetoric, saying, be careful what you wish for. And it's pretty much what we're seeing. And it's not just within landlord groups. The issue has gotten so bad that the Bank of England themselves have addressed the issue in their Summary of Business Conditions report, citing, supply continue to contract as smaller buy-to-let landlords continue to exit the market, while demand for rental properties continue to rise, leading to double-digit rent inflation. So I think if the government doesn't step in soon, we could be seeing a housing crisis like we've never seen before.
But because landlords are leaving, guess what happens then? Landlords leave the market, there's more properties flooding onto the market. The prices on those properties hasn't really dropped much. You know, the prices that I sold some properties this year for 160 grand, they're still the same prices on the internet now. So prices haven't really dropped. And people go on about, well, more landlords leaving, that's really good because they'll flood the market and then the prices go down. Oh, really? Because they've gone down, haven't they? No, that's not what's happened at all. Because a number of properties coming onto the market doesn't mean that people magically have these deposits available. It's just not what happens. And actually what happens is all these properties coming onto the market now, guess what happens to rental properties? Well, there's less of them. And people argue and they counter with it and go, yeah, but more first-time buyers are buying. No, they're not, because they haven't got the deposits to buy with. How does that happen?
So rents are rising tremendously at the moment. We've just rented a 2-bedroom flat in London where that used to be renting for around 1,300, 1,400 quid a few years ago. Now we're getting 10 times the amount of calls for at £1,800 a month, which is outrageous. But that is what the market rate is actually going for. So I've got a theory as to why these rents have been rising prior to the actual interest rate going up. So I think the first thing that's happened is Section 24, George Osborne brought in to say that if you own a house as a buy-to-let landlord on your personal name, by 2021, which was last year, you will not be able to get any phasing of the tax break that you used to get between 17 to 21. You were phasing the amount that you can offset against your tax every year, and he was coming down by 25% every year. So it started at 2017, 18, 19, and then we got to 2021 where you could basically write off nothing against your tax for the interest only part of the mortgage. That caused a heck of a lot of hassle for private landlords. I think add that to the battering that landlords have had in the last kind of 5 years or so, in whichever sector, in whichever media you look at, social media, print media, TV, I think loads of people have just had enough. And I read a couple of weeks ago that 200,000 private landlords have actually exited the sector. So if you think about one of the things that's happening in the market at the moment, that rents have risen sharply certainly in the last 12, 18 months. I think it's to do a lot with the fact that PRS have been under attack for so long. Section 24, introduced by George Osborne 5 years ago now, has now really kicked into the market. Your private landlord who has got one property, and actually 98% of landlords in the UK are made up with single house ownership landlord, so they've only got one basically. So if you have 200,000 people or homes being taken out of the private rental sector, you get supply reduction, but the demand has either stayed the same. I know Brexit's happened, so loads of people have left, but you've got net migration probably equal, because other people from the Commonwealth are coming to fill in all these jobs that we have that we don't have people to work. So you've got supply down, demand either same or increasing, and my guess is increasing, and I think that's why a lot of the rents have been rising.
The war on landlords continue, leading to the great landlord sell-off. Things are getting more expensive for tenants and making it much more harder for them to pay rent. And this is resulting in people trying to do Section 21. But again, that's becoming more difficult. Rules are coming in with EPC coming down to the line. So landlords basically are selling off low yield properties and are selling off properties that are lower rating than C, because they have to bring them up to the standard, and they don't want to do that. The first port is to send it to your own tenant, and if that can't work, sell somewhere else.
Had a message this morning of a landlord who's got a property with a tenant in it, but they're looking to offload it just because of how laws and costs are going at the minute. They wanted to take it to market, but obviously it's difficult when you've got a tenant in place. My answer straight away was, first of all, offer that property to the tenants that are sitting there, and thereafter, based on their response or position, consider taking the property to the market. So if you've got a property with tenants in it and you're looking to offload it, first thing is always offer it to tenants, and thereafter evaluate your position and then take it from there.
How much money do landlords really make? And this might surprise you, but the average landlord would probably make about £300 a month. It's about £3,500 a year in profits. But how come everybody thinks that landlords are swimming in money and they've got tons of cash and they're loaded? Well, it's probably because generally people think that landlords get to keep all of their rent. Well, that's just not true. In most cases, an average landlord will have to pay out for mortgage payments, insurance, management fees, maintenance fees, and then any profit they get from that, they either pay income tax on it or corporation tax on it. So one way or another, they get very little of the actual rent they receive. But then you've got the appreciation, the growth in the value of the property. Again, everybody seems to think that landlords just have all of these properties that just grow in value, making landlords thousands and thousands and thousands. Just not true. Yes, a property should, we hope, grow in value over time, but that's over time. And also, you have to use your own cash to get that property. A landlord will probably have saved up their own money. They might have even really worked hard at saving up that money to buy a property investment. And then in 20 years' time, it might be worth more than it's worth when they bought it. But also, they don't get that cash. If that property grows in value, they don't automatically get the money that it's grown by, because they still own the property, so they haven't sold it. So the reality is, everybody thinks that landlords are absolutely loaded, but actually landlords only make about £300 a month, and they don't just cash in the growth in the value, unless they refinance, obviously, but then they've still got to pay everything back. So that gives you a little bit of insight into what the average landlord is probably getting, and the average landlord only has about 1 or 2 properties. So, you know, we're not talking big bucks here.